Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name's Anthony Rodriguez with KETIV. It's a pleasure to have you all today and with an important topic that more and more of our customers are adopting to improve their sales and quoting process within their design and manufacturing business. Today, I'm joined by Caitlin and Keenan with Oldcastle Infrastructure, along with Cameron Wetton, who's one of our senior architects at KETIV. I'm looking forward to getting into the discussion. We're not only going to talk with Keenan and Caitlin both about their experience, what they do at Oldcastle Infrastructure, and what their products are, but Cameron's actually going to show us some of the solutions and how we've automated their quoting process and some of their design to manufacturing process over the years. With that, let me go ahead and introduce Caitlin and Keenan and have them talk a little bit more about Oldcastle Infrastructure. Caitlin's a senior director of engineering at Oldcastle. Keenan's an engineering manager. Welcome, both of you. And if you don't mind talking a little bit about your role and what Oldcastle Infrastructure does.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. We're really excited to be here today and talk about one of our favorite things, which is our products. And then especially as we dive into it later, we're talking about the automation that you and the team have built here for our products. So I'll just talk a little bit, maybe introduce myself. So I am Senior Director of Engineering at Oldcastle Infrastructure. My background is civil engineering, and I've been part of this organization for going on 9 years, which is hard to believe. Time flies when you're having fun. Keenan, I'll pop it over to you to do a little intro, and then we can talk about what we do.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin, and thank you, Anthony. So as Anthony mentioned, I'm the engineering manager for the energy market. We have a bunch of products that we sell at Oldcastle Infrastructure. And this automation tool primarily works with one of the products in the energy space. So that's why I've been so heavily involved. Again, so excited to talk about the tool and what it's done for the team. So this tool has been a great accelerator for our team. The automation has enhanced all of our capabilities as far as how much work we can get done in a certain amount of time, and I'm excited to share that with everyone.
Yeah,
Great.
so
We're
maybe
looking. Oh, go ahead, Kid. Yeah.
I was just going to talk about what we do at Oldcastle. So Oldcastle Infrastructure, we design and manufacture solutions that connect and protect critical utility infrastructure across North America. We really play in some big end markets of water, communications, and energy, which we'll talk about, I think, energy a lot today. So water, anything from our conveyance systems to our stormwater systems, which capture and treat stormwater runoff from our built up areas and cityscapes, and then switching over to like our Plastibaton product, which is we'll talk about today and in greater detail with the automation tool. That product is helping to really cable management solutions that we're connecting and housing fiber, so bringing high-speed connectivity to different areas, and then really helping to build up the data centers, which are driving a lot of the new trends that we're seeing today in AI.
Yeah, I know our whole team's grown to appreciate your product, Caitlin and Keenan. It's interesting as we work with customers, and it's really what we're passionate about is seeing products get to market. Products like yours don't necessarily get the attention as some other products, and some of us out in the world can take it for granted. But it's been fascinating for us to learn the complexity, details of your product, and how much goes into it. So with that, we're going to go ahead and dive into the discussion and looking forward to having you all share more about what you've automated, your approach, and what the results were. So let's go ahead and get into that. Why don't you start, Caitlin? Maybe you can take this with what, what, how you were working prior to any automation, and we'll talk a little bit about what automation means here in a bit. But what was happening? What was driving you to consider automating, and what did things work like before at Oldcastle Infrastructure?
Sure. So a lot of the work that we were doing was manual in the sense that the teams were having to lay out projects. So anywhere from a small line of trench, so a straight line, to anywhere to more complex projects where you have a lot of intersections and bends and angles and elevation changes. So, a lot of complex projects that they were having to do and lay these out in a manual way. So, understanding what the rules were, so we really built up a team that understood that and having some documents to help that, but a lot of that back and forth iteration. We
Mm.
had some projects that would go anywhere from a simple one, maybe a couple hours, to some that were taking up to 2 weeks of work to do, which is a massive time suck for one individual just to be really focused on a single project for 2 weeks of their time. We have a team that, if you have multiple projects that were coming in, some of them were bogged down in a lot of these larger projects. And so our lead times were getting a bit longer, just waiting and getting the other projects into queue.
Yeah, and to add to that, something that's important for everyone to understand is when we sell the Plastibaton product, which is our trench product, it's very often not just a request for SKUs or parts. No one is saying, "Hey, I need 10 trenches and 10 covers."
Mm.
Usually it's a partnership between the engineering team and the customer. We'll look at their site layout, their construction plans, and we will build a whole layout of where the trench is going to be. And if it's a straight run, it can be pretty simple. But once you start adding T's and 90s and 45s and vertical deviations, there's a lot for the team to consider. And when they're building those projects, like Caitlin said, it's very manual. I think of it as almost connecting different Lego blocks with software. So you have a trench, and then you're going to get another trench, then you put your covers on top. And you can imagine when you build something like that, and then later you have a revision. Let's say, oh, I want to try a different size. You already have your red Lego, and it's the size that it is. The only way to change the project is to take that Lego out and get the new Lego. So it was very, very manual and very
That
time
was probably
consuming.
one of the biggest pain points, right, Keenan, was the rework or the revision. So doing as what we thought was one size trench and doing a complex layout that was taking those hours and hours of work, and then to come back through the process with our customers to change the trench, which we're more than happy to do that. But it was basically like redoing the project when you had
Yeah,
to
Yeah.
change that product size.
exactly.
Wow. And Keenan, can you talk a little bit about the tools you were using and are using today?
Yeah, so we always, when we quote a project, we build a 3D model of that project in Inventor. It just helps us be accurate with our estimates and our cost and the quotes that we give to the customer. Of course, that takes a lot of time up front. But yeah, we build all of that in 3D in Inventor. Once we have the 3D model built, we will use that to generate, bill of materials, 2D drawings, cut drawings, and everything else that we need for the project. But it always starts with that 3D model in Inventor.
Okay. And how big is this team, Caitlin and Keenan? How many people are on the team and how many, projects do you get a month or week or year or however you measure per engineer?
Yeah, so it's been increasing. Currently, we are at 40 or 50 quotes a week,
Hmm.
and that's across a team of 4 designers, as well as a team supervisor, and it's a lot of work to keep up with.
Yeah, wow, great. Well, I know there's a lot more to talk about and where we improved and how we improved. And this topic has been important, I know, as I speak with customers more and more, which is how do I use the capabilities that exist today, like AI, automation, the technology that continues to evolve, to just increase my efficiency and increase the capacity of teams like yours in engineering. What was driving you to do this now? Can you talk a little bit about that? What in the business was causing you to to consider changing things because change is not easy. Doesn't matter how good it is. There's people involved and old habits involved, and it's a concerted effort to go and make a change like this happen. Can you talk about what drove this to happen now?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can. Go ahead, Caitlin.
Oh, I can kick it off, and then Keenan, we can both answer this question. So we actually had predecessors before Keenan and I joined the team that were starting to look at this. So we had dug up some old files where they had
Mhm.
started to explore some automation potential within Inventor. And we took a look at that. I'm like, well, maybe there's something here, especially as our backlog started growing, the number of projects that we were receiving, the size of the projects we were receiving. So great for us. We're very excited about getting that type of work, but it was how are we going to manage this type of backlog and
Sure.
maintaining the customer demands and the work requests to meet their deadlines and bid dates.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned a specific industry doing really well now, Keenan. Can you talk about the industries you serve and where you see trends?
Yeah, yeah. So we sell trench all over the place. We sell it in water and communications. In substations is a pretty big customer. Rail
Hmm.
is another very large customer. But recently, there's been an explosion in the infrastructure of data. Lots
Hmm.
of data centers are being built all over North America, and they're using our products. So that's been a huge boom for us, and we are quoting and selling like crazy to try to keep up with the demand that's coming from data centers and AI.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we hear a lot of that. And what I've heard you share so far is there's been, an increase in demand. You're looking to drive efficiency with the team to be able to respond to these proposals and quotes faster, which I imagine helps you win more projects. And do that with the same team you have without, going and having to hire a lot more people. And it's been great to see how this project's evolved, and we're looking forward to getting down into it. Before you jumped into automation, I know you all did a lot of preparation. You began to talk about that, Caitlin, looking at old projects and models and sales. Can you talk about that and give any advice to people before they look to automate a design in their business? Any keys or tips that you'd share with the audience we have today?
Yeah, I think it was the right time, for us for this tool. And, we talked about that some of our predecessors had started exploring it, but it really wasn't the right time. So making sure that what we wanted to do with this automation tool was aligned with our overall strategic vision for our organization. So I think if I could give a word of advice for others that are also looking to explore that, how does that align? Where are the trends headed? Where do you want to support in not just today, but in the future for that growth? And I think that's really what helped us drive this and get this tool going within our teams is because it did totally align. We saw this boom coming from data centers. And how are we going to be able to support the demands and the speed at which these demands are coming in? We expect everything really fast. When you type something into your AI engine, you want a pretty quick response. Well, I mean, that's the same thing that we want to deliver that sort of speed back to our customers. And so having a tool that can do that for us, I mean, that it really just aligned quite nicely.
Yeah, no, that's great. And with your team, Keenan, you have the data, the designs, anything, as an engineer, you'd share with the audience and prepping the data or designs for this that you think would be advisable.
Yeah, I'd say it's really important to understand your process. I think sometimes in engineering, there you get to this point where there's a lot of tribal knowledge and know-how and engineering judgment and a way of working that's just become the status quo. It's very important to demystify all of that
Hmm.
and and really document your process in a way that it's easy for the automation or the automation team to codify what you're doing. So there was a lot of effort to really say, hey, this is our process. beginning to end. Here's all of the niche and unique situations that we need to consider. All of that's really helped the automation team with KETIV understand our baseline procedures. I would also say it's important to understand the tools that you're starting from. As Caitlin mentioned, we've tried to do this in the past, and one of the lessons learned from those previous attempts is that the automation team didn't really understand the tools that the team was using today. And so that being Inventor and all the 3D modeling that we do there. They understood tools like it, and we thought the process would be seamless and moving to different softwares, and it just made the automation piece really challenging as well as the adoption. So that early partnership to define the process and make sure everyone involved really understood the goals, the designs, the basis of everything that we were doing, I think was a key for success.
Yeah, that's such an important part, Keenan. I know, as customers come to us and look to either automate or simulate a design or, whatever they're looking to improve, it's it's hard for us to commit to a time frame, not knowing how prepared the customer is with information on the other side. And you're so right, documenting your process, knowing the rules of your product, knowing what you want, and having that documented prior to jumping in and looking to program or automate or simulate or whatever you're trying to do is so important. Can you talk about your interaction with the team, Cameron, at Oldcastle Infrastructure, and point out maybe a few things you noticed they had that made this project go so smooth?
Yeah, I think, like Keenan said, that awareness of what their processes are, and also what their engineering rules are. That's one of the important things that we have to pin down when we do an automation project like this. Is when you're doing automation, you're essentially writing code to have the computer do the things that you would normally do or that your team of engineers would normally do. You try to boil down that process to the most essential items. And in order to do that, you have to know your process and also have codified your engineering design rules. And Oldcastle Infrastructure had that from the beginning for us. Usually we'll sit down with a customer and kind of work through what those are. And a lot of times the teams that we're working with haven't necessarily thought about that ahead of time. And so they have to kind of, we help them work through that and figure out what those rules are. But with this team, they were ready to go. They had their rules codified in a document that they just passed over to us, and it made that whole process so much easier.
Yeah, it's great. And I know sometimes the hardest part is to stop doing certain things. A lot of our customers, they kind of cater to their customer and do everything. And controlling that, putting parameters around it, I know are important to the success of a project like this. Um, let's talk specifically about the automation that we built. Keenan, maybe you can start by describing what this tool is, a little more detail about your product and what the output is. And Cameron will be showing us the product for all of you attending as well. So hang on and you'll actually see it go to work here in a bit.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and explain that. So like I mentioned earlier, we're building these layouts with all of these Lego pieces. It's essentially a massive assembly in Inventor. And like Caitlin mentioned, it can be a small one, 2-hour project, or much larger, 2-week project. So we have somebody go in there and they lay out all of the trench. They then have to add all of the covers. And everywhere that you have an intersection, which is what I will call any location where you have some type of deviation from just a straight trench. You could have a T connecting to your trench. You could have 45 degrees, 90 degrees. At all of those locations, you have to add steel supports to the design, and all of those supports are going to be different depending on the angles and the sizes of the trench. Not to mention, we have various options for covers and cover rating and how we want those to perform. So you're going to take all of your different pieces and build it together in that 3D space. And that's really where a lot of the effort was going, was building that initial layout. Downstream of that, we would generate a bill of materials. That's what we use, of course, to quote the project, as well as cut drawings or 2D drawings that say, hey, I don't have a standard piece of trench here. Instead, I cut it at a 45-degree angle. So we need to generate a drawing, a 2D drawing showing that cut so that it can be produced. So that's what we were doing before.
Yeah, that's great, Keenan. This isn't just about the 3D models, but the drawings are, as important. And we'll see that when Cameron shows us the product. Cameron, why don't we jump in? We're looking forward to seeing what the tool looks like and their product and how it lays everything out. So let's go ahead and look at the detail there.
Okay. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so what I have here is I want to demonstrate what the automation tool actually does, and by showing you the full process. So I opened up Inventor, I started with a layout sketch, and then I just went through the whole process from layout sketch all the way to finished drawings. And I pre-recorded this, and so I'm just going to kind of let it play, talk over it a little bit, then pause it at certain points, and we can discuss things. But what we have here is the layout sketch that Keenan was referring to. So one of the important things that we wanted to do when starting this automation was to try to make the adoption of the automation tool as seamless as possible. Because adoption can be one of those sticky points with any automation project, with any change. Like Anthony mentioned, change is hard. And getting a team who's used to doing things a certain way and have been doing it that way for a long time, getting them to change over to using something new, doing a new process, using a new tool can be difficult. And so we want to make that process as easy and as seamless as we can. And so one of our goals from the very beginning was to try to understand Oldcastle Infrastructure's existing design process and try to build the tool to make it familiar to them. And like Keenan said, part of their existing process is to create this two-dimensional layout sketch of the full system of trenches. And so when we designed the automation, we figured that the best way to have the users jump into this was to do the same thing, just continue doing that exact same process that they were doing before, create the layout sketch exactly the way they were doing it before, so that process would be familiar to them. And so here's an example of a trench layout where the user goes through and sketches everywhere they want trenches to be, sketches the lines that represent the center lines of all the trench runs, and then they can dimension it, size it however they need to fit the project requirements. And then the next step is where the automation needs to take over, is the automation needs to understand that layout sketch. And so we built a process where the user would then go into this layout sketch and tell the automation, okay, these specific sketch lines represent trench center lines. And the user has several trench sizes, trench models to choose from. And so they'll choose which model they want to assign to each sketch line. And here I'm going through and doing that. I've just kind of sped up that process a little bit. But then once that process is done, now the automation can understand, okay, these specific lines are the ones that I need to look at to assign a trench model to build, to understand and interpret the layout sketch correctly. And then once they've finished doing the layout sketch, there's also some other tools you'll see at the toolbar at the top is a custom toolbar that we've built for Oldcastle that provides several tools that they can use to assign the trench models like we just saw me do there, but also to configure the different options for covers. Like Keenan mentioned, there's different models and different duty ratings for the covers. And the user has the option to configure things like that, as well as configuring other accessories or items like traffic curb and that sort of thing. And once the user is finished configuring the layout sketch, then they switch back to the trench assembly, and it's time to actually populate the trench assembly with pieces of trench. And so that's going to be the process that's going to happen here. Switch over to the custom toolbar and hit the populate update button. And what this is doing is now the automation is fully kicking in and doing its thing. So one of the things the automation has to do is interpret the layout sketch and understand all of the different types of intersections that it can encounter. Like Keenan mentioned, you can have like 45-degree bends, 90-degree bends, some custom angle in between. There can be T intersections. Sometimes there are cross intersections where 4 different trench runs come together at a point. So the automation needs to understand all of that about this layout sketch. And so we've built through the codes the ability for it to interpret intersections between sketch lines and understand all that. And then it has to know, okay, if it's a bend type of intersection, then I'm going to need to make an angled miter cut at that intersection between the 2 pieces of trench. Or if there's a T that comes in, there needs to be an opening cut into one of the trenches. And so interprets all of that, does that, and then also has to figure out how long each piece of trench needs to be to get dropped in, and how long the covers need to be, how many covers there are, if the covers need to be cut at an angle or not. And it also has to add supports for the covers, like Keaton mentioned. At some intersections, a steel support is required to support the covers. The automation understands that, knows what size of trench it needs to fit, what type of intersection it's dealing with, and then what size or model of steel support needs to be dropped in. And it then, after it's interpreted all of that data and understands what it needs to build, then it actually builds it and starts building the actual individual part models for each trench and cover, and places them in, constrains them, and builds out the assembly. And as you saw, that process was very fast. I did speed it up for the purposes of this demonstration, just so that we weren't waiting through the whole process. But in reality, that when I was recording this video, that process took 6 minutes to complete. And that's the process that Keenan pointed out was the part that takes the most time for their users, is actually building out the assembly. And I don't know exactly how long, if this is one of the smaller ones, or probably more medium-sized project. So don't know exactly how long it would take for their users to do that, but hours at least, to build out a trench system like this. And the automation was able to put that together in 6 minutes.
So, Keenan, a project like this, what we're looking at, like from a scale standpoint, how big is this? What area are we looking at? It's hard to see on screen, but I kind of know where these projects go. How long are these trenches? How wide? What can you talk a little detail about what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so each single piece of trench is 3 meters long, so about 10 feet long. And I don't know if you can see it here, because we're kind of zoomed out.
Yeah.
But
I can let the video play a little bit further, and it will kind of zoom into a little more detail if you want me to do that.
And so, well, that'll give you an idea of scale as this video plays. I mean, each one is 10 feet long.
Oh, great. Okay, there we go.
There you go. Yeah, you can see that a little bit better.
Yeah, and a project like this with multiple sizes and multiple different intersections, and I think there are multiple cover types on here. this is easily gonna be a week.
Okay. And Caitlin, your team, we know your team and Keenan's team's involved in this. Who else is involved in a project like this? What other teams are you interacting with to get these proposals out the door?
So we're working directly and very closely with our customers directly, with our commercial teams, so our sales organization. We're working with our customer service group. And then we also work really closely with our operations team, so those that are actually manufacturing the trench. So cross-functionally for a project, we're working with many different faces.
Yeah. Yeah. And how has the automation helped there? How has it helped, in a team environment like that where there's multiple people and, can be confusion, when things aren't clear or undocumented. Have you seen benefit
Yeah.
to working with them amongst the team?
I'd say one of the biggest things that we see is the reduction in revisions. And that's a
Hmm.
lot of where our internal pain points were really residing, is that anytime you had rework or revision, that was a multiple back and forth between those different functions. And so using this tool, we're able to bring that revision rate down. And so
Okay.
now we're creating a clearer picture for those groups that we're working with and less iterations.
Yeah, that's great. And it brings a certain level of confidence, I'm sure, as the teams work together and, build their relationships. Great. Cameron, I
It
didn't
does.
mean to jump in and cut you off there, but why don't you proceed? We're looking forward to seeing the rest.
Okay, no problem. So yeah, as you can see here, we just kind of got an overview of a quick view of what the assembly has built with all the covers and trenches. We've got a few color coding options to kind of communicate to the user about something they might have to take a look at with the red and the yellow trenches. And as you can see up at the top, the command bar that I mentioned before, that's a custom toolbar that we built for Oldcastle Infrastructure that allows the user, once they've built the assembly like this using the automation, they also need to be able to make changes to it, to manipulate it, add accessories, add things like cable clips and dividers, anchor bolts, other types of hardware. And we've built tools that allow them to manage those. And another thing that the tool does is it automatically creates the fabrication drawings. There's a quick view of the steel support that we were talking about before that has to support the covers. The covers have been turned off here just so you can see those. And there's just some end plates, different accessories. But one of the things that the tool does is it builds the fabrication drawings. So that's what this is going to do here. We're going to run through the process. And again, this process was slightly sped up for the purposes of recording this demo, but not much. It took maybe about 10 seconds to run through that process in real life. And what you can see here is it's built out for every piece of trench that's in the assembly. That's not just a standard full-length uncut piece of trench. It's built a fabrication drawing for each piece of trench and cover. So anything that has an angle cut in it or an opening cut in the side for like a T or a cross junction, then that piece of trench has its own fabrication drawing with dimensions, so that Oldcastle Infrastructure can send that to their fabrication shop to get the pieces built. And so we'll just flip through a couple examples of the drawings here of the different items that have been generated. And this is over 60 sheets that were created in a matter of seconds. So massive time savings for the user on that as well. In addition to the fabrication drawings, it also generates a full trench system layout assembly drawing. And that's what this is doing here. And again, slightly sped up for the purposes of the demonstration, but not by much. Again, it took probably about 10 seconds to do that full generation process. But what it's built here is a layout view of the entire trench system with all the dimensions and item balloons pointing out all of the various pieces that go into building this assembly. It was all generated automatically. It also built a bill of materials for the full trench system in this case here. You can see that there. And then another sheet as well for the covers specifically and the bill of materials for the covers. And that drawing process, like I said, it takes about 10 seconds to generate that full trench system drawing. And then the user still has to go in and do a little bit of cleanup because the automation is sometimes we'll have dimensions overlapping or item balloons will kind of overlap with certain things. And so the user has to go in and do a little bit of cleanup, but it massively improves the throughput of their engineers.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that, Cameron. That was great to see exactly how it works, what we're automating, the different documentation, and it really is a complete package that the engineers can now get to share with their extended team. Um, Cameron and Keenan, can you maybe talk a little bit about, when you went live? It's in production now, you're using it. How was the adoption? What sort of, training, how the users embrace it, and maybe about some of the results you're seeing today.
Yeah, I'd love to touch on that. I mean, change management is a large study, and it's a lot of work to get everybody on board for a big change like this one. So we had a pretty robust launch plan. Before launching, we had everybody get trained, and as they were training, they gathered all of their questions, and they were already in communication with Cameron. Cameron put together a series of really strong videos on how to use the tool, how to do different types of layouts, even covering niche situations that he knew they were going to encounter. He already had videos prepared for that. So the onboarding and training for how to use the tool was pretty seamless. And I think it will continue to be seamless. We still have those videos. If we were to onboard a new employee today, they would have an amazing backlog of videos to watch and use to train. So we had everybody train. We had everybody gather questions, and they would submit those questions to Cameron, as well as someone on our team, Sindel, who is the technical expert, and she's been with the project from inception. So she was able to field a lot of those questions. And they were even using the tool before we officially launched. If somebody felt very comfortable, and they had a little bit of extra time, they could build a layout twice, once with the tool, once the old way. There are some people like Sindel who were very comfortable with the tool and just went ahead and started using it before it was launched. So by the time the tool got officially launched, everyone was pretty familiar with how it functioned. And with that launch, we made sure to keep a separate log of, or two separate logs. The first log was just tracking the time savings. In the past, it took us this long. Now with the tool, it's taking us this long. So every single project since launch, we've tracked how long it's taking the team. And we have a second log where we would flag issues, bugs, concerns per project, and we were able to pass all of that information to Sindel, who could condense it and distill it to a list of very specific bugs or feature requests that she would pass to Cameron, and he would start addressing.
That's great. Yeah, it's important that we talk about, we talked about time savings, the efficiency, the quality of documentation, the amount of throughput that's increased. And, we see all those benefits, but I also think that, engineers want to be engineers and, taking away a lot of the tedious, repetitive kind of tasks would likely help you attract better people and, make your people happier. Caitlin, can you talk about some of the business results you've seen and how you've seen the team yourself embrace this and what sort of reaction you're getting?
I think you summed up my dream there, Anthony, and what you just shared with that's my goal. And so one of our fundamental values at Oldcastle Infrastructure is our people. And
Hmm.
so making sure that we have people, we don't just want them here for a short period. We'd love them to be able to grow and advance in their careers within our walls. And so allowing things just like that, allowing engineers to actually engineer, being able to automate, and like you said, those repetitive tasks, if we can automate those and eliminate those from some of the day to day, it does allow greater focus on what's next. Thinking about new products that we want to launch out there, thinking about maybe new ways to do some of the old things that are
Hmm.
also out there. So I think when you are enabling a group with tools like this, you're freeing them up to be more creative and to put more emphasis in that research and development.
Oh, that's such a great point because yeah, as we, work with customers and, even myself at times, when you hear automation, sometimes people can get concerned about that. What does it mean? What's the end result? If they can do more with less, does that mean without me? And I'm sure, those thoughts and ideas cross people's mind in the organization. Can you talk about, what your team is doing now with the time savings, Caitlin? You mentioned R&D and new product development, but
Yeah.
50 to 80% savings in time, that's significant. What is the team using that time for today?
Well, I can't share everything because we have some secrets in the works, of course,
Oh,
the
great.
beauty of R&D. But I mean, yeah, it's allowing us to think of new ways to do different projects. So, coming up with, I mentioned at the beginning when I talked about our organization, I talked about we're not just providing a product, we really want to provide solutions. So, getting additional savings and not having to focus on 80 hours on a single project, it's allowing the team to think about bringing ideas to the table on, well, what's a better way we can accommodate this problem that we keep seeing, or how can we better create a solution for one of our for some of our customers. So I think it's really giving them that space to be able to do that when you're not just bogged down in the weeds of doing the same task over and over again.
Yeah, that's great. There's also, we see, as you're automating, you're creating things faster, you're typically making more documentation. And because it's through a system, there's a lot of data that's gathered in that. And therefore, when you have that data, you can learn from the past much better. Keenan hinted to that a little bit about tracking some of the time savings. And I believe over time, you'll begin to see patterns, trends, and be able to make more intelligent decisions as you go forward in planning other products or other projects. Keenan, can you talk about any other metrics you're looking at and, any results you see from the team today?
Yeah, I definitely want to highlight some surprise gains. Or
Hmm.
I mean, the main purpose of the tool was to automate that layout process. That's where we were spending the majority of our time, but there's been a lot of other gains as well. So on a layout itself, beginning to end, that's where we're seeing that 50 to sometimes 80% increase. Um, but also, so for example, you saw the cut drawings. Normally, that was a separate case or a separate project. We
Hmm.
generate the layout, we win the order, and then the team would go after the fact and create those cut drawings. Now, all of those cut drawings are created in a moment, and
Hmm.
there's no need to wait until we get a sales order to be efficient with our time. We can just immediately generate all of those drawings, which that was a surprise gain. Another surprise gain was the fact that our procedures were built with the assumption that a person can only focus on a single project at a time. There's no efficiency that they gain by working or multitasking on different layouts. But with the tool, that opened the door for us to be able to do so. So it takes
Hmm.
some time for the tool to run. While the tool is running, you can start another project. And now the efficiencies that you're gaining are compounding, right? So there's a lot of benefit that we've seen. So we mentioned the 50 to 80% on layouts. If you have a situation where you're doing 2 layouts at the same time, you can double that. In the instance of cut drawings, we've cut down the time nearly 100%, which has been incredible.
Wow, thanks for sharing that, Keenan and Caitlin and Cameron. I've heard customers talk about you saving them time, saving them resources, improving efficiency. But now you're making customers' dreams come true. Look at that. What a great accomplishment. Anything you'd share, Cameron, with working with Oldcastle Infrastructure and for the others out there, just in how to prepare for automation as they go forward, and just maybe a few tips.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to say that I didn't work on this project alone. I worked with another engineer here at KETIV named Tiffany Hayden, and she was my partner on this. I couldn't have done it without her, so definitely want to give her a shout out. But yeah, as far as advice to others who might be looking into doing some automation, I think we covered some of the most important points about there's going to be some preparation involved, as far as understanding your own processes, and you have to really understand them at a pretty granular level. So if you've never done that before, you definitely want to start taking a look at that when you're thinking about doing some automation. And so understand your processes, understand your engineering design rules, and try to be prepared to help us understand what those are so that we can give you the best product possible. Yeah, I think we covered
Yeah,
those most important parts.
no, that's great, Cameron. Now, from a leadership standpoint, Caitlin, what advice would you give engineering leaders that are out there thinking about, where to automate, how to automate, where do I begin? Well, what will my team's response be? Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe share a few pointers?
Yeah, sure. I'd say, biggest one, know where you're going. What,
Mhm.
not just tomorrow, but look into the future as best as possible. Where are you headed? Trying to think in that direction. And then I'd say, as you're actually getting going, start small. What are the small tasks that are repetitive, that are really manual, that can be pain points for our people? Start there. It's a good place to recognize where there are obvious improvements, and then think big. I would
Mhm.
say think what is possible, or maybe I'm not even going to question this. I'm just going to throw this out as this is an ideal thing that we would love to see automated or built. And so starting small and then thinking big, I think can really help drive new solutions that haven't really been thought of before.
Oh, I really love that. Starting small and thinking big. A lot of times customers, when they think automation, they want to automate every inch of the process and product. And to begin, you're so right. And starting with something small so your team can learn, embrace it, see what's possible, and then begin thinking much bigger. And the team's well more educated to know, what's possible at that point. So I appreciate you sharing that. Talk about for Keenan and Caitlin both. Maybe we'll start with Keenan. What's next for Oldcastle Infrastructure and your team?
Yeah, so like Caitlin said, we can't give all of our secrets and all of what's next. But for sure, this has shown us that there is a lot of opportunity to bring automation, to bring AI into our process and start improving things. I like, Anthony, that you mentioned enhancing capabilities and not replacing. I think AI gets a bad rap for coming in and just getting rid of people's jobs, but you can see here it's a great way to make your people more effective and
Hmm.
really expand their toolkits, and not only expanding their time but expanding what they can do. So we're really excited to explore that more.
Great. That's awesome, Keenan. Caitlin, how about for you?
Yeah, I mean, just to build on what Keenan said, that the AI is a tool to help us do our jobs better. And so leveraging and exploring opportunities where we can improve within our business. And I'd say not even just externally, but internally as well. And so it's giving us a chance to explore, well, where can we improve to better set ourselves up for the future? So thinking like on a data side, what do we need to do to clean up our data so we can better prepare for that next step?
That's great. Well, like Cameron said, this isn't an individual effort. It surely was a team effort. He mentioned Tiffany on our team playing a role. We had multiple people on our team playing a role, but your team was equally important to that. And the partnership as we go forward, we're looking forward to seeing what's possible as well and what we can do together. And it was a pleasure to speak with you both today. I know everyone will appreciate the advice you're giving, your ability to share what you've done and your future outlook and what ideas you have as we go forward. I know, Caitlin, while your team's saving time, you've improved efficiency. Both you and Keenan are continuing to grow your team, and you have some positions open. If anybody out there is interested, I'm sure Caitlin and Keenan would love to hear from you. At KETIV, we're looking forward to helping all of our customers improve their process by managing data, designing their product more effectively, like Cameron showed you here today. Um, Testing your product earlier in the design process to minimize prototyping, and then manufacturing with the engineering information that's produced. At KETIV, we partnered with the leading technology to be able to help in all those areas. And as you've seen today, it's generating great results. So again, it's been a pleasure to speak with you today, Caitlin and Keenan. I encourage everybody to visit the live video story. We also have future sessions coming up from KETIV, both sessions like this, but also detailed sessions on how to get started with automation and automation starter packs. So I encourage you to engage with us. Cameron, myself, our entire team's always available to help. There's nothing more we love to do than learning about your product and learning about how we can drive great results like this. So thank you all for joining. Caitlin, Keenan, thanks again. Cameron, great work to you and the entire team. And we look forward to seeing what's next. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for having us today.
Thank you. It's been amazing.